Hi guys, Charlie Black 20 back again with another political discussion with.
Carlos, how you doing, guys?
All right. So, Carlos, what is our subject today?
So today, I thought it would be an interesting conversation to bring up, conservatives and liberals, Democrats and Republicans, and pretty much how those views have kind of shifted and the differences between them and how we view them now as to what they were before.
Okay, this is a very, very big topic, and I'm going to straight off give you my stance on this, which is that of today, the parties of today, I think they are split into actually four different groups. They are
Okay.
not two parties, they are four different groups. In
Okay.
general, there's obviously exceptions, there's a big gap in so much of this, but in general, a rough standing is that there are hardcore Republicans, then you've got conservatives, then you've got classical liberals, and then you've got progressives. And the main difference is at the two extremes.
Right.
And then the rest in the middle, conservatives and liberals, have differences of ideas, differences of how things go, but they remain malleable. They remain willing to look at things from a different perspective. Like they have principles to a certain
Okay.
degree. I think that hardcore progressives, there is a certain amount of hypocrisy to a certain degree.
On both sides.
I just happen to think, as a progressive, and again, I am a little biased in this, that hardcore Republicans are have even more hypocrisy because they say one thing and then go after the exact opposite to achieve their goals. Now, progressives can do that too. I just happen to think they do it from a more social standpoint than they do a legal standpoint.
Well, I mean, I think that both sides have their own hypocrisies, like within their ideas, right? Because, I'm kind of split down the middle. Like, I'm not against any progressive ideas, but I'm also very old school and traditional with how I look at life and family values and things like that. I'm not religious either, but I understand why people are that way, and I think everybody's just like mudslinging each other, like on both sides, kind of like tearing the others down instead of coming together and coming up with ideas. Where it's like instead of looking at conservatives as very traditional old school family values, they're looked at as racist, homophobic, and things like that. And they have their own flaws with they're trying to pass laws against abortion or laws against gay marriage and things like that. And honestly, if you just raise your family right and mind your business, and everything will be fine. Like, you can't just control people in that in that regard of trying to make abortion illegal and make gay marriage illegal. Where it's just like, if you raise your family right, they're going to make the right choices. Would you agree?
I find a little bit of a problem with the phrasing. I
Okay.
understand where you're coming from, and you're mostly absolutely right. However, being gay, not a choice. Getting an abortion is a choice. I
Okay.
think now being gay, I don't know. I've never been gay. Wasn't born gay. I have an uncle who's gay. He says he was born that way. I have friends that are gay that are bisexual. They say they were born that way. I don't get it, but the way they live their lives, who they choose to have relations with, is really not my business. Even
It's
if they're
nobody's business, really.
yeah, if you want it to be kept within the family and you're like, we don't talk about it outside of that without really trusting the other person, that's fine. I just don't want the government getting involved in that because that's a personal life. It's like
Right.
saying that somebody of a different race can't marry somebody of a different race and the government's going to stop that and punish them if they do. I mean, we had to have the United States Supreme Court in 1967 say, no, these states governments can't say you can't get married to a different race. And they came up with the defense of, oh no, it's better for society that way because it keeps peace between the races. And it's like, no, it does not. And the Supreme Court had to rule that way. And then the Supreme Court comes in 2013 and 15 and rules against anti-gay marriage laws for very similar reasons.
I think that it becomes a slippery slope with gay marriage and Republicans, of course, because like they're very religious people. That obviously marriage for the most part is done in a church or in a place of worship, right? And that's where they kind of like go like, wait a minute, like now you're crossing some lines into like my beliefs don't align with that, so I don't think you should get married there. And I'm like, I'm not against gay marriage. I'm not against but I understand where people like kind of like get offended there.
You're absolutely right. And I actually kind of agree with that point. And I
Mhm.
used to be very, very like that point. There are churches, synagogues, mosques, whatever religious place that will marry gay people and did marry gay people. And it was an entirely individual choice for that church.
Yeah.
I just don't think the government should be stepping in. And also, you don't necessarily need a place of worship to get officially married.
No, you don't.
You just need a legal contract. And in fact, my parents did not get married in any place of worship because my father's family, they did not want him married. Well, they didn't. The family didn't care, but my father could not find a priest that would marry him and my mom because my mom was Jewish, and so they got married in the basement of my mom's basement, my mother's family's basement, by a rabbi. My father didn't care. The family didn't care as long as the kids were raised Jewish. I mean, they didn't raise an objection, but
So-
they couldn't get married inside a place of worship because they were two different faiths.
Well, yeah, but it also doesn't align with gay marriage doesn't align with most religions anyway. They're very traditional and old school. So do you think that they're wrong with saying like no, you shouldn't be married? In our house of worship if your beliefs don't align with ours. And it should religion be kept out of marriage? I mean, I think religion should be kept out of it because I'm not religious or anything. But is it people really just trying to get the traditional, wedding that everybody wants to get and everybody else has?
Yeah, there's a certain cultural element as well as a religious one where the idea of one man marrying one woman is very traditional, and it's actually something that's existed for a long, long time. However, before that, there was polygamy. There was men marrying many women at the same time. And that still goes on across the world in a lot of different places. And
If you could afford it, go ahead. But go
that's
ahead,
one
no.
argument us guys are always saying
Yeah, no.
against it, but that's
Right.
more of,
That's for another video, guys.
yeah, if you get this video up to 50 likes and we'll do a video on
Yeah,
that.
we'll do a video on that. Yeah, I'll
But-
do it.
But
But go ahead.
But when it comes down to it, tradition over equality, I find that equality should win. And it's not necessarily saying that you're against equal rights if you're more traditional. It just means that we're preferring to say, no, we're taking a different stance. And we're saying, well, if tradition has to go so that equality can win, we're willing to do that. That's at least my perspective on what a lot of hardcore progressives say. Now, I'm not quite a hardcore progressive because I do disagree on certain things. I'm a little more conservative on a couple of issues. Not a lot, but a few.
I mean, this is where like the mudslinging goes, where it's like if you're considered an old school conservative, it's like, oh well, you're just homophobic and you're against gay rights and you're against people of color, and it's like, nah, like you hate immigrants or whatever. And I don't think that's the case. We just look at things on a moral ground that you just can't kind of agree with, and progressives tend to kind of spin that against people who are kind of like more old school, where it's like it's okay like to be traditional, but don't spin it and make it an argument.
I can kind of see that. I guess you're mostly right.
No, I mean I see
a
it on the news
philosoph-
all the time. It's like
It's just that
if there's no room for discussion, it's always an argument. It's always the blame game.
that you're absolutely right. In the last few, not years, maybe in the last couple of decades, 3 decades maybe, it has been mudslinging. It's gotten much worse in the past few years because both sides have, I wouldn't say entrenched themselves, but they've chosen what really matters to them. And one side, in their minds, both sides feel they have to win, and the only way to win in this case is to destroy the other, or at least to put the other in the secondary position, which, from a philosophical and moral standpoint, I absolutely, totally disagree with. From a political standpoint, though, I kind of see where they're coming from, and I kind of agree on a certain level.
I'll give you an example of how dirty politics has become and how the pandering has kind of like just taken over like the way that voters, kind of see their running party. It's like Donald Trump, I'll give you the biggest example right now, like probably one of the worst presidents in history. Passed some good policies, but also pandered to the very racist people, that are out there. People calling him racist, and he definitely didn't deny it. It was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get those racist votes too, but I'm going to get those traditional conservative votes as well by the things that I'm passing. And I think that's a very sick thing, because like again, he didn't condemn, these neo-Nazis, when they were marching and with tiki torches and all that shit. Excuse me, but and it's just. And it's rotten, rotten politics, dude. I just don't like where we've gotten now.
Well, you make a very good point, and that's almost exactly what Trump did. You just laid it out very, very clearly.
Oh yeah.
Except for one thing.
What's that?
You're right. He did go after the traditional Republicans based on the ideas that the Republican Party had already espoused, which is less federal government intervention, less regulation,
Mhm.
and also just more of a closed society. Not necessarily completely and utterly isolationist, but way
Mhm.
more closed. And on one issue where progressives and liberals agree is that with conservatives and hardcore Republicans is we don't want to be in all these wars right now. We're sick of that. But that's the only thing where the isolationist policy is kind of agreed on. The rest of it is that the real problem is not that Trump went after the racist votes.
Mhm.
There are people that do that all the time, and they don't get a huge voice.
Mhm.
They don't get a lot of attention. They don't get a lot of votes.
Mhm.
In this case, the reason he was able to get so much is not because he pandered to both traditionalists and Republicans, and or to hardcore Republicans, the racists. Well, I think that there's a slight line there, but it's not much of one.
Mhm.
It's not that he did that. It's that he unveiled. He unveiled. He opened the can of worms of racism
Yeah.
that was within the Republican
It was more
Party.
hidden, and
The
now it's not.
The Republican Party was built. The Republican Party of today, from the late '60s on, was built on the idea of that equality between the different groups of people within this melting pot. That the ones that have to be at the top, the dominant ones, have to be white, and that if they aren't, we have a problem.
Well, I think that was just the way that America was built from the beginning. I mean, like we were built on slavery and you know, pretty much manifest destiny. You know what I mean? And all that shit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's
So it's
that's,
not. It has nothing to do with whoever was a Republican or was a Democrat. I mean, dude, both sides were built on slavery, dude. Like, and
You're
it's
a-
not.
well, here's the thing. Did you know that the Republican Party, and yes, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct on a philosophical point of the 20th century view of racism.
Mhm.
But if you look at the Republican Party of the 1850s and 60s,
Mhm.
they were actually the party that wanted to destroy slavery. in the end.
Exactly, correct. And that's where I got into a conversation with a friend of mine who thought it was the opposite, and I was like, hold on for a second now, like. Lincoln was a Republican and got murdered for abolition for abolishing slavery, and it's like, dude, you're getting it wrong because of what the media is telling you to think.
Yeah, and one real quick correction. It wasn't that he was murdered for getting rid of slavery. That was done by Congress. But he was murdered because John Wilkes Booth heard a speech that Lincoln gave off the cuff on a cornerstone.
Okay.
And what Lincoln said, and I'm paraphrasing here, please don't
Right.
come after me, is that he was asked about African American citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And he had never really spoken about that one way or the other. He had given intimations about it, but he had never said anything solid. He said,
Okay.
in the case of the most intellectual African Americans, I'm not going to use the words that were used in those days,
Correct.
and the ones that served in the military, I think we should offer them enfranchisement, which meant voting.
Mm-hmm.
And John Wilkes Booth turns to a friend of his in the crowd and says, that means N-word citizenship. That's a dead man walking, the last speech he'll ever make.
Wow,
So it wasn't
okay.
the abolition of slavery, even though Wilkes was definitely a supporter of slavery,
For
but
sure.
it was already gone by that point.
Mhm.
Lincoln gave that speech after Congress passed the 13th Amendment.
Mhm.
And so it was the idea that whites could stand on equal legal footing of any kind with, that blacks could stand on equal footing with whites of any kind
Right.
was like just too much for this
Right. And it was
neo-Confederates.
a big change in you know the way the country was already
And it wasn't even giving it to
founded on.
And Lincoln didn't even say we're going to give it to all of them. He said the most intellectual and the ones that served in the military. And at that time, being very, very smart and being a soldier was considered very brave. And most Union soldiers agreed with this. They fought tooth and nail to help their fellow African American soldiers after the war keep their pensions.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they didn't do much more than that, but they said, no, they served with us, we're going to help them. But that's the difference there. But that's a little bit of a historical tangent. I apologize.
No, but it has a lot to do with the conversation that we're having
Yeah.
right now and the way that everybody views Republicans and Democrats kind of
Yeah.
thing. Where it's been it's shifted. There's been racism in both of them. But
Yes.
it's always just the finger pointing and the blaming. Of like again like I think I'm split down the middle where like, you know, I believe in, you know, conservative ideas, but I'm also, you know, very progressive in some ideas too. Like I don't care about, you know, whether you want to get an abortion, like get an abortion. You know, it's none of my business. You know, you want to get married and you're homosexual, go ahead for it. You know, if you're transgender, you know, like if you want me to call you, you know, ma'am, I'll call you ma'am. You know, it's like it's not up to me to, you know, but when we start arguing things about science, then we're crossing a slippery slope. You know.
When it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity as a science, I honestly don't know enough about that to really give a solid opinion, other than I can't explain it. That's it. And I don't want to try to explain it when I don't have the knowledge. But historically speaking, the different conservatives and liberals, it was very clear where they stood. Conservatives of the old days were for smaller government, which meant that the states had more control than the federal government. The federal government was there to protect the states and to declare war. And that was basically the role of the federal government. The federal government was not this expansive thing that we have of today. And then you've got the liberals who believed in a much larger federal government that had more control over the states, maybe equal power or more power than the states as a whole, but also that the Constitution is a living document that you would change occasionally based on the times, and that you would bring it up to speed with the new ideas and new technologies, and most importantly, with the new innovations that came about. Whereas conservatives of those days believed in a written interpretation, meaning that whatever's written is what's written. And if that's written that way, you only make tiny tweaks here and there as time has gone way, way, way by, and then you change it a little bit at a time if you have to. Otherwise, you just leave it the way it is. That's why a lot of people, and that's where hardcore Republicans and hardcore progressives really butt heads, is because
No, you said butthead. Just kidding. Go ahead.
funny, but they hardcore Republicans interpret the written Constitution, but they only read up to a certain point and then they stop, and then they say that's what's written. And then hardcore progressives look at the Constitution and they look at the spirit of it, but they also take the written words in their whole context back in those days, and they look at the written words and they take them and they put them into today. And to a certain extent, I can understand why they do that, and I'm a little guilty of that too. Like especially the Second Amendment, where it says that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed by the government, and there will be a well-regulated militia. I'm paraphrasing, so please forgive me.
But you're right about
and
the
so
Second
progressives, including myself, take that and we look at the entire written text and we say, take that out of that from those days and bring it to here, and say that there are certain weapons that only certain people should have and the rest should not. Now that's a very, very broad interpretation from a spiritual point of, from a spirited point of view of the Constitution versus the written portion.
I mean, I think the Second Amendment. I mean, the right to bear arms. You know, it's important, but also it's not as chaotic as we make it out to be. You know, what I mean, it's like you're not going to overthrow the government and the military and with the weapons that they have with just having a rifle or something like that. You know, you're not allowed to have a fully automatic rifle if you're a citizen. You know, I mean, you have to have special. Special, certificate, to have that, registration or whatever.
Yeah.
So you can have firearms and things like that. So I don't think it's that crazy. Where it's just like I think there's a lot of gun violence that happens in this country. In urban areas. Like where a lot of Black and Hispanic. People are kind of gunning each other down, and it's kind of like we're worried about these mass shootings. In schools and things like that. That they happen a lot, sure, but again, like imagine all the people that are just murdering each other in this country, you know what I mean? Like every day with just guns that are just semi-automatics, it's like, do we really, who are we really trying to protect here with these kind of laws? Are we trying to protect the people that are, I want to say, white people that are getting shot in their school, you know what I mean? And their kids are taking their parents' guns and shooting, or do you even care about the minorities that are gunning each other down? Like that's a big thing for me.
That's where I find there's an inconsistency with people who are gun rights advocates and people who are regulation advocates, which is that there's a certain amount of hypocrisy that we started caring about this the most when it was starting to affect other white people.
Right. That's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. There is a certain amount of hypocrisy, but I also think that it's partly generational, which is that I actually have this theory that every generation that grows up is taught equality a little differently. The idea of equality and the premise of it, which is that it used to be the idea that equality is great and all, but it doesn't really exist. And then the next generation grew up thinking, well, maybe it's an ideal we should strive for. There's certain steps we should take. And then the next generation grew up thinking, no, it's an ideal that's right here, right now, and we can pursue it. We can do something. And then you got the next generation that says, which I call the progressives, and even the millennials, and especially Gen Z, who grew up saying, no, equality is not an ideal. It's a reality that should be. It's what should happen. And the people who are against it in their minds are the evil people. Now, to a certain degree, I agree with them, and to a certain degree, I disagree. I just happen to think they're more in the right because they're actually trying to fight for it, and they're doing it as fiercely as they can.
I mean, you can call me, cynical for having these ideas. I mean, like, equality is never really going to exist amongst, people. I mean, there's going to be always, strife and always, just like arguments, what I'm saying, like against like each other. We're always gonna tear each other down, and it's always like, and I disagree with a lot of progressives that want to spin everything on. Yes, there are, misogynistic, rapists and all kinds of things of that sort, but they're not as, it's not as bad as they make it out to be. You know what I mean? It's like, but you're always gonna have that. You're gonna have racist, homophobic people, people that are misogynistic and want to keep women down. But I don't think that there's a whole system in place to keep those people down. I think that there are people that believe in that exist in the machine, but it's not a system created that exists right now. It's just, I think there's a lot of victimhood and a lot of just victimizing yourself, to kind of like get ahead a little bit sometimes, to a degree, not a lot, but I think everybody has a chance to compete and to get ahead, especially in a place like America, whether you're a woman, whether you're a person of color, whether you're gay, what I'm saying, if you got the mental fortitude to get ahead and you fight for it, and you might have to fight for it, you might have more hurdles because, you're a woman, or you're a gay woman, or you're a gay woman of color, or whatnot. Like, it's gonna be harder, of course, but that doesn't mean it's put in place for you to fail.
That's where we progressives disagree. The system that is in place was put in place by people that were trying to prevent that, and people who are still trying to prevent it. And I don't mean to. It's not because the system in and of itself is evil. It's because the people who put the system in place had these prejudices in themselves, and they built them into the system, and it's perpetuated because it's easier.
But would you agree that we've progressed past a lot of like what our founding fathers were believing in?
It's not just our founding fathers, though. I mean, back in the 1960s, when Lyndon B. Johnson was running for re-election, for his first re-election, and or maybe just his first election, quote unquote, he had a big fight within his own party between the Mississippi white delegation and the Mississippi black delegation, because the black delegation said, you're discriminating against us, we're the true party, we make up the majority of the voters, even though they weren't, quote unquote, official voters. And then Johnson offered a compromise, basically saying, we will give a token to the black Mississippians, and the white Mississippians will have the party, but we will also ban discrimination within the party from now on. And almost all the Mississippi white delegation walked out and went over to the Republicans. And the black Mississippians, the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party said, no, we're not going to take a token. And they did get discrimination banned in the Democratic platform. But again, that's where the political shift comes. It's not simply a free market of ideas anymore. Or if it was simply a free market of ideas, progressives would win, because the old traditions are not as popular, but they are still built into the system, which is why it's so much harder to fight.
I mean, look, America, I take it as like one big experiment that, it was founded on a decent idea of freedom, but of course, back then only for white people. But then again, we've learned and changed a lot of things where we have, ended slavery. We have, ended segregation, and gave women the right to vote, people of color the right to vote and choose, and we're still progressing and still like, learning as we go along, I think. I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, we're changing a lot every day. And every decade, we're making strides, like of all the mistakes that our that our ancestors made. You know, we definitely are. I believe we are. You know, I have a hard connection to America. You know, I love this place. You know, and I'm not from here, and it's been very welcoming to me. And you know, it's again, we're correcting the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, I would mostly agree, but it's never that we simply gave. It's never that the country, the government, gave something to these people, like African Americans, women, gay people. They never simply gave it to them. They had to fight,
Sure.
and getting the right to vote didn't mean equality for women. It simply meant the vote.
Mhm.
And we still don't have full equality. We don't have an amendment for women to have the same equality as men, which, yes, it might seem like a token idea, but it's a real thing to have that in the history books and to have it in the government that no, men and women are equal. And African Americans, they had to fight for, let me think. Within the United States as a country, they had to fight for 250 years.
By the way, another video we should do is the gender pay gap, which is another one that just came up because we're talking about equality with men and women and things like that, which
Yeah,
is a whole another long ass video that we'll do eventually.
I hope so. I'll have to study up on that because economics has never been my strong point.
Okay.
I know more about video game economics than I do about this.
This guy.
But again, where it comes down for me is that when I look at how hardcore Republicans of today, and it used to be a different set of people in the old days,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I compare hardcore Republicans of today, politically speaking,
You're right.
to the old Southern plantation owners of the old days.
Mhm.
Because the Southern pro-slavery people, because what they would argue is that the Constitution guarantees the right to own slaves because they were property. Now, from a written standpoint, they were right. Now, and,
Morally, they're wrong, but yeah.
and they believed they were morally right because they
But in the
looked at
context
Bible.
of the time,
Yes.
correct.
Yes, and also, but then they argue, and then after, and they argued for stronger legislation to allow slavery into the new territories where they felt that the federal government had no place.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fugitive slave law was strengthened in the 1850s as a result of a compromise, which meant that northern states, northern citizens who didn't want anything to do with slavery, they didn't care about it. They just wanted it left in the South, even if it was going further west. If it stayed in the South, fine. But now all of a sudden the fugitive slave law tells them, no, now you have to help return fugitive slaves, even if your laws, which a lot of northern states had laws not only getting rid of slavery, but also saying that any runaway slave that came there after a certain amount of time was technically free. And so they were suddenly told, no, now you're going to have to help southern slave catchers and return them back to the South. And it's like, wait, I didn't sign up for this. We have our state laws that say we don't need to be involved. So why are you involving us all of a sudden when the laws have been fine? And then again, more stuff came. And then finally, the Civil War breaks out. And Southerners argue after the war, when they've lost, that they fought for states' rights.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously people that are more liberal traditionalists, they'll say, classical liberals, they'll say, okay, states' rights to do what? But then I go further in that argument and I say, no, you actually wanted the federal government to intervene in other state laws, just that they were northern anti-slavery states.
Well, here's one
So
thing.
you actually wanted more government intervention in that aspect, but you wanted to be left alone with slavery. So it was really just slavery.
Right. And anyway, jumping back on topic about, you know,
I'm sorry,
modern,
and I apologize.
Go ahead.
Politically, that's where hardcore Republicans stand. They're not saying states' rights, states' rights, states' rights. No, they are saying that over and over and over again. And then they say, but we want the government to stop abortions. We want the government to stop gay marriage. We want the government to stop trans people. We want the government to do this, this, this. That's big government. That's federal government. You can't
True.
have only the states doing it, and then the federal government says no,
Mhm.
but then the states will ignore them. No, no, no. The federal government of today, and this is going to cause a lot of controversy, is more powerful than the states. The
It's-
states answer to the federal government.
Listen, it's turning into like a lot of like virtue signaling, you know, from people that are saying like, oh, if you believe in abortion, you're an evil person, or if you believe in gay marriage, you know, you're an immoral person and things like that. And I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I've already gone over that part, you
Yeah.
know, where it's like, again, like classical liberals were more balanced minded, whereas like now the progressives of today are just saying you're an evil person. You know, if you don't believe what I believe, then you're a bad person. And I don't think that's true. You got to really not mudsling so much and really blame other people for why things are going wrong. It's like, you know, it's like, oh, you believe in misogyny and you believe in this. It's like, nah, dude, like maybe they're just old school. And again, like you're entitled to your own rights. It's like you shouldn't have to like force people into put it into law.
Yes.
You know, that's my whole thing. It's like, dude, mind your business and just live your own life. Like, why do you have to try to control other people? You know?
I think it comes down to the idea of what you identify with.
Mm-hmm.
For me, being Jewish, I identify with equality because of what I've seen through history, and people who didn't grow up with that kind of historical learning, or the idea that we've been oppressed in the past, they look at other people saying we're being oppressed or have been oppressed, and they say, "What are you talking about? It's not what's really going on," because it's so much easier to just go along, and it's hard to have somebody empathize rather than sympathize. Empathize, you can feel that person's pain rather than sympathize and just be like, well, I feel bad for that.
Yeah, I mean, like discrimination has always been like, especially like on a big scale, has always been like political. You know, you look at World War II with the the dirty end of the stick that the Jewish folks were dealt. You know, and then you look at slavery in America. You know, and how fucked up. I mean, excuse me, how messed up things were. You know, for black folks. You know, like in this country, and people of color in this country. You know, they were kind of like just had to bear the burden. You know, to kind of put other people up. You know. And it's always been a political thing, man. It's never been a real, nobody really looked at their moral compass and said, these are people. You know what I'm saying? We just care about our people. So it's always been about, helping each other out and just being this whole, what's the word I'm looking for? But you're just trying to help out your own folks. You know what I mean? It's never been a utilitarian
Your own circle?
thing. Yeah.
And you're that's the thing, is that where, I think that's another thing where progressives and traditionalists, mainly conservatives, not the hardcore Republicans. The hardcore Republicans, in my opinion, they definitely say, no, we're for ourselves. Mm-hmm. Whereas the conservatives, they say, no, we are for people, we are for equality. And some of them, I would say the majority of conservatives are extremely great people. You're part of their circle, however you are part of that circle, you are just golden. Whereas when you're outside that circle, I don't want to say matter less, but you're not part of the circle. You're somebody who they can look differently at. That since you're not part of the circle, you're not the same. Whereas progressives, especially hardcore ones, say, no, if you're a bad person to one group of people and great to another group, or vice versa, that's not enough. You need to be great to everyone, except based on bad actions. Otherwise, they're the same. And that's where progressives get angry when they don't see the idea that is their hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. And I can understand that, although I will admit I am a little biased against that idea, because I do believe that there's certain groups of people, based on certain aspects that they put forward, and especially not just their actions, but what they say about different groups. I say, yeah, I really don't care. I say, crush you beneath our boots and move on. The groups, not the individuals.
And I say there's a lot of the differences between the two parties and their ideas is that you have a lot of progressive people that are saying to people of color that, you're going to have a lot of hurdles. You're never going to make it because you're a minority and you're a woman, and you might as well, and you're just like, and George Bush Jr., I think it was, like, he called it the soft bigotry of low expectations. Remember that? And it's one of those things where it's like, I'm kind of split. Like, there are hurdles for people. Like, a lot of progressives will tell you, like, hey, you're going to have it harder because you're a woman or because you're a minority. But then again, it's like where you have conservatives will be like, hey, man, like, everybody has hurdles. You kind of have to, go forward and fight. Like, you're never going to accomplish anything if you don't fight for it, you know?
You're absolutely right. I can absolutely see where you're coming from. I have never thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. The idea that it's a soft bigotry, that, oh, we're not going to make it because of this, this, and this. And you're right. That is a little bit of bigotry. You could look at it, or you could look at it as people acknowledging what the system has done. And
true.
And conservatives look more at an individual.
But the more you're told that, the more you'll start believing that. I think, you know what I'm saying. If you start,
It's
you're
possible.
gonna manifest that.
Very
Into,
possible.
You could manifest that idea into existence if you tell yourself that you're never gonna make it because of this, then you're never gonna try. You know what I mean? And it's like you should always want to try.
Yes,
You
it
know,
used
and I'm
to-
not saying there's not hurdles. There are.
It used to, I guess it could have been more overt in the old days, obviously, that no, you're not going to make it because you are this, rather than because these obstacles are in your way. But I think it's more of an acknowledgement by progressives that the system is unequal. And the difference is that progressives actually fight to remove those obstacles.
Right.
Whereas I don't think conservatives, I know hardcore Republicans are absolutely for keeping those obstacles in place. Whereas I think conservatives are more about, we're not that interested in the obstacles, just get past them and that'll show that you're worthy. Whereas progressives are saying no, it's supposed to be equal opportunity, not equal result, but equal opportunity. And right
Yeah.
now you're not given equal opportunity because of these obstacles. And so that's why I identify more as progressives, although I do admit to being a little more conservative on things. Like, I am pro-choice to a certain point. But there's a certain point in the timeline where I think the government has to step in, especially if it's for the wrong reasons you're getting an abortion. What those wrong reasons are, I don't know.
No, there's always going to be equal opportunity, just never going to be equal outcome. You know,
Yeah.
everybody's different.
Yes.
You know, everybody, and it's not based on race or sex. You know, it's just based on capability. You know, like if they're always going to have somebody smarter than you. You know, more physically, you know, fit than you. You know, just tougher. You know, mentally and just can go against the grain and fight. You know, and not everybody has that. And there's other people who just kind of suffer for it.
But then comes the idea of what if somebody on paper or in person are on paper, two people for the same job have the exact same qualifications. One's white, one's black, one's a man, one's a woman, whatever it might be, whatever the difference is. How do you decide who to hire? And you have to say, do I go with the more familiar, or do I go with the one that I don't know as much?
You were supposed to go with the skills. You know,
But that's the thing. What if on paper they're exactly the same? That's the problem.
On paper, you shouldn't. You know, they ask you, you know, what your sex is, what your age is, what your race is.
Yeah.
You know, skin color and whatnot. And it's like honestly, like you should be able to look at that person's, like, what's your resume based on, like what you can do, not on what you look like, not what how old you are. And again, those things matter. You know, if you're a woman who is older, you're probably not gonna last in my company for this long. You know what I mean? You're probably, or if you have a big family or whatever. You know what I mean? There's different things, but that matter. But it should be about your skills, you know, based on whether you get that position or not, you know. And that's where I'm kind of against this idea that there's some kind of like patriarchy in place keeping women down, where it's like, nah, again, but there are factors in there that kind of like go against my argument, which is, well, why are you asking me how old and if I'm a woman or if
It's not an entire system. I think we are kind of drawing a line here, which is that it's not the entire system completely rigged against everything you're doing. It's that there's a portion of the system and a portion of the people who make up that system and fight for that system that are trying to put these obstacles and keep the obstacles in place. And unfortunately, they have a very large voice, not simply because they're being hateful, as some would put it, but because there are people who are like, well, we don't want to change things too much. We just want to go ahead, and so we're not going to fight to help change things. We're just going to stay silent. Which, again, staying silent is complicity, and nowhere more does that stand out than history.
Okay, no, I agree with that. But again, just based on whether you get a career or a job or anything like that, it shouldn't be based on whether your race,
It shouldn't
sex,
be,
and
no.
it should be about your skills. What do you bring to the table? Like, what are your qualifications here? And we're going to weight them on a scale, and we're going to pick the right person. Not because we know what your sex is or what your age is or what your race is. We're just going to pick you because you're the better candidate. But we don't have that.
No, we don't.
Every job application we have, you got to put all that information down. And I'm starting to wonder if that factors into whether I get a job or not.
Yeah.
It's like because my name is Cruz. Oh, excuse me. But yeah.
Well, I can see where you're coming from. I mean, it's a tough thing. I mean, again, as I said, if we were living in a vacuum where discrimination didn't exist, that's exactly what would happen. Where racism where skin color didn't make a big difference to people. But unfortunately, we live in a system and a culture where that kind of thing has been almost completely ingrained into who we are. And then it gets perpetuated over decades, centuries, and it's not an easy thing to overcome. We've managed to overcome a lot of it. I'd say we've overcome the worst portions of it, But that doesn't mean we've gotten rid of it all.
No, I
obviously.
think you and I had a conversation one time in the break room about how tribal, human nature is. You know what I mean?
We're very
Ever
tribal.
ever since Neanderthals and all that. You know what I'm saying? That's
Yeah.
why that's why Homo sapiens were able to work together better and win. But it's always come down to our tribe, like who can help each other out. So it's always you're always gonna be collected into groups.
Yeah.
Men, women. Whether you're Christian, whether you're from the same you're from the same country,
Yeah.
and all those things are gonna factor into whether you help each other out. And unfortunately, that's going to be the demise of humanity too. It's helped us create such great things and discover great things, but it's the reason why we're going to destroy ourselves, I think. And it's a very cynical and pessimistic outlook, but it's just the reality of it. I mean, look at the news. I mean, look at the march, with all those tiki tortures. You know what I mean? It's like, dude, people are always going to group themselves against other people, and it sucks.
Yeah.
And even though we have that belief and idea that equality exists and we're all going to unite one day, but there's other people that are like, hold up, we're not the same.
Yeah.
And it's going to be that way for a long time until we are able
Yeah.
to work together and stop the mudslinging, guys.
I hope
you
we
know?
can, yeah. I really do. I think that as a political tool, it should exist between political opponents as individuals, but not against the policies. The policies in and of themselves are almost never evil. There's a few of them that are, but overall policy is not evil. Now, I think we should conclude this with one final thing. So,
Okay.
Carlos, where you stand politically, do you think you have any room for change or discussion after this video?
Any room for change or discussion?
Yes.
I mean, I'm still in the same place. I'll never fully be one side of a political party. I don't believe in the government as strongly as these people do, and I never will really fully trust the government because I don't think they have my best interest at heart. So I'm always going to be split, and I'll always question everything. And I tell you, people, you should always question your party, not just the other person's party, and why things aren't changing. I mean, we had that conversation about the $15 minimum wage and
Yep.
why Democrats fought for it and they didn't vote for it. It's like,
Absolutely,
think about it.
absolutely.
Because again, they always think for themselves, which you should too. And that's how I look at it, and that's how you should look at it.
All right. I'm hoping someday we can both have a discussion about how we stand on certain political issues, where we differ from the party lines, and where we have our own individual differences and agreements. So, for now, we're signing off.
Yeah,
Charlie
man.
Black 20. Catch you guys later.
Catch you guys.